All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm super excited for episode 16 to be introducing you to one of my best friends on the entire planet. This is Andrea Dodge. She is a certified Enneagram coach, and she is going to be teaching us probably at least once a season about some Enneagram stuff, because the Enneagram is something that a lot of people are looking into right now. There's a lot of misconceptions about the Enneagram, how to use it, and it's at the same time something that I personally have been finding really useful for personal growth, spiritual growth, understanding myself, understanding the world, understanding people around me. So Andrea, welcome. We're so excited to have you here
Hi.
today. So can you talk to us a little bit about what is the Enneagram? Especially like there might be people listening to this that have never heard of it. So if we're
Yeah.
starting with the very basics, what's the Enneagram?
Okay, so the easiest way to describe it is that it's an ancient personality type assessment,
Okay.
but that sells it short in so many ways. So it's ancient in the fact that it's gathering wisdom from various people throughout the ages, and it kind of formed together and took shape in the 70s,
Okay.
possibly even as early as the 60s, but 1960s we're talking.
Yeah.
And that's when it really took shape into the Enneagram system that has become popular today. So it is about personality, but it's so much more than that. So when you take your Strength Finders assessment or Myers-Briggs, those are all really helpful tools to figure out kind of where you're at right here, right?
Okay.
Gives you a list of criteria, or you can take a clear test and get a clear answer, right? With the Enneagram, there's not only does it show you your weaknesses, which some people are not ready for, it shows you a path for growth. So it's almost like a map, like a roadmap for how have I been looking at the world? How have I been trying to make my way in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be true of your whole life. So like once you discover your Enneagram number, you should be able to kind of trace that back throughout your entire life.
Okay.
So it doesn't change, but then it also gives you a path to move forward. So what are the ways that I can be healthy? What is the best way for me to be present in the world? And the Enneagram talks a lot about, we'll use terms, different teachers use different terms, but the false self and the true self.
Mm-hmm.
So it will point out what ways the false self or our personality construct has been, what ways that we've been trying to present ourselves in the world, again, that just are not serving us.
Mm-hmm.
Ian Cron talks about the Enneagram system as 9 different ways of being in the world.
Okay.
9 different ways of looking for acceptance, love, like all of the basic human needs. What have we used in our personality to get those needs met? And we all have aspects of all 9 types because we're human. There's one type for everyone. Of the 9 types, there's one type that you lean on more than others. So Anya means 9.
Okay.
Gram means drawing. So it's just that in the most basic form. Enneagram just means a diagram of 9.
A diagram of 9. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the symbol for the Enneagram, I'm sure many people have seen maybe around and just don't know. This might be a little bit, it's going to be a symbol kind of like this.
Okay, so it kind of looks like a star, but it's open at the bottom.
Yeah. And really, it's less about the shapes. It's more about the fact that the numbers go in the circle.
Okay.
And I think people get hung up on the inner shape. All that's trying to do is show us, like, let's say if you were 7, we'll come over here to mine.
Mm-hmm.
There's a line pointing to 1 because that's where I draw from when I'm getting unhealthy or when I'm stressed and I need that 1 energy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then there's a line over here to 5, and that's what I look like in health. So those lines are there just for showing us our stress and our growth. So it's less about the shapes, although there is some, if you really take a deep dive into the Enneagram, there are some more connections with the shapes. There's like harmony triads and all sorts of other ways to break down the Enneagram for growth.
Okay.
Most people just need to figure out their number and start there. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Just
So
start there.
you have these 9 types and their personality types. So can you just give like just some examples of types? Like let's take, I'm an 8. Let's talk about just a really brief overview of what an 8 is so people can get some of the flavors of the different numbers.
Yeah. Yep. And 8 is a great place to start. So 8s, 9s, and 1s are in the gut triad. So again, remember the Enneagram has those little groups, those triads that it'll break down in. So the gut triad or the instinctual triad is that first one, 8, 9, and 1. They are also part of the, it's part of the anger triad. So with 8s, they are called the challengers or the protectors.
Mm-hmm.
And they lead with that intensity and that passion. So their anger is kind of more outward. They wouldn't even, you might agree, you don't even necessarily filter it as anger.
Not at all.
But sometimes the way it's received would be like, whoa, she's intense. She's got some intensity. Yeah. So 8s make their way by having that strength and leading with that protective energy. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why they do that is because they see vulnerability as something that needs to be kind of covered up. Mm-hmm. So they lead with that energy. Mm-hmm. 9s are the peacemaker. And if you see at the top, like they're at the very, very top.
Okay.
The 9s, which is so cool because they see from the top, they can see all the way around the Enneagram. And again, it's just a visual representation of the way that the 9s are the peacemakers. Okay. They can see different points of view and hold different points of view at the same time and make sense of it and are okay seeing different opinions, seeing different ways of being in the world as having value. Because they always see how they need to make peace or what needs to be done to keep the peace. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they end up losing themselves. They lose themselves and their own sense of identity in order to pursue the peace that they prioritize, which is awesome. So they're still in that anger gut triad, but their anger is forgotten. So somewhere deep inside of them, the work for 9s is to dig up that anger, which they don't really like because it doesn't feel peaceful at all.
I know a 9 and I'm thinking about her and I'm just like, yep, it's so accurate. And that's been so interesting learning about the Enneagram. And finally, after like years of chatting back and forth, like kind of settling in on what my number is and now really letting those lessons start to sink in and those discoveries start to sink in. It's so crazy how deep and yet at the same time how practical this information is, and it's something that you grow with. It's not just, oh, well, I'm an INFJ or whatever it is, and that's who I am, and that's what I needed to know, and now I'm moving on with my life. It's more like this gives you a practice almost of living out healing your wounds and also stepping into more of who you are, I guess, is how I'm currently feeling it.
And I think that, a lot of people will only go as far as to discover their number and then not look at any of the other aspects of it. And at that point, it is just a personality. It's just saying, hey, this is how I am. But it gives, the Enneagram has movement to it, and you need to move. You need to figure out what that movement looks like for your type, for your dominant type. So 1s are the other number in the gut and anger triad. And they are called the perfectionist, the improver. They live to improve themselves and the world around them. But the reason why they do that is because they hear this inner critic that is constantly telling them what needs to be fixed and not letting go. So you can see how when that's turned inward, right, that can be a real struggle trying to talk through that inner critic and to learn to recognize when the inner critic is just being unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So their anger is felt. They know they're angry. So it's not like the nines where have forgotten it, like they're just not even paying attention to it. The ones know they have anger, but they don't feel like it's right or good for them to express it. And so it ends up being repressed anger and it settles in as resentment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they kind of have, again, you can see like each number has something that they really need to deal with. If you want to grow, the wound of each type is the thing that you need to deal with. And there's, we'll talk more about ways to do that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And one thing that I think for me has come out of this is that it's helped me to understand like why I clash with certain personalities, but then it's also given me a way to start having more compassion for those personalities. Like a 1, that might be a number that I would typically sometimes clash with a 1.
Yep.
But like knowing the strength of their inner critic and just the weight of them always hearing that helps me to understand why sometimes I might interpret them, as being critical toward me or other people or whatever the case may be. So it's not just, what I like about the Enneagram is it's not just about you. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just about me figuring myself out. It's also like, this is how I move through the world. The other thing I kind of like about the Enneagram that you brought up that I've never heard anybody really talk about so far, and I'm very new in my knowledge to this, which is why you're here, is that it's in a circle.
Yep.
And so in my work, so much of what I do is about the cycle of the year, the patterns, the cyclical patterns that we all are going through. And I'm finding with people that I'm working with, the more we can get back to a sense of moving through a cycle and more of a sense of organic growth, the better growth happens versus saying, I'm in this box, I have to stay in this box, these are my rules, this is how I'm always going to be.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Enneagram allows you to see where your growth opportunities are, but also more of like blossoming into who you have the potential to be, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Really cool.
I know that you said you're a 7, but do you want to share a little bit about how you got into this work? What's your story with the Enneagram? Because you and I both started as musicians and our work has evolved a lot of different places over the years. So we've both gone from the world of music into different forms and aspects of healing and personal growth. So do you want to share how you got interested in the Enneagram even?
Yeah. So I had a friend, a coworker, a couple years ago, start talking to me about the Enneagram. I have always loved, I've loved strength finders. I love personality assessments. I think it's so interesting to understand other people better and also understand yourself better. But the Enneagram, man, it felt different. It's just so eye-opening, this whole process. And honestly, when it came to like figuring out my own type, that took a very long time for me. So she recommended a book, which I've got here. So The Road Back to You, Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile are two, like you can find a lot of their teachings online. They both have separate podcasts. They both have different websites and stuff that they've written separate books as well. But The Road Back to You was a great primer, so I started there. It starts out, diving through each type, but then it also gives you a checklist at the beginning of each chapter. What this might be your dominant type and man, none of it clicked. So part of it for me, of why I started to dig into the Enneagram was that I could not figure myself out.
Interesting. I didn't know this.
I couldn't do it. I mean, I was like, okay, I don't feel like I feel like I'm self-aware. I feel like I have an accurate sense of myself, and I could not figure out my Enneagram type. So part of it was sheer stubbornness and needing to know the answer.
Yeah.
Needing to know the answer.
Yep.
And I also I saw its potential. I saw its potential for understanding, helping us understand other people, and also giving us a way to, especially as teams or as groups. So, any community that you're a part of, any work team that really requires understanding and knowing the people that you're working with, I see its potential as something that can really help us, again, not only grow as individuals, but help us see other people more clearly and to understand where they're coming from. And I feel like people are just hungry for that.
Yeah.
They want to be understood, and they also want to understand where other people are coming from. And man, do we need more of that in the world.
Oh my, yeah. Okay, can we make everyone do
Yeah.
That's the 8 talking. Can we just make all of the people
It
do
would be so simple.
So then when did you go from, what was it like for you when you finally figured out your number? Let me ask you that.
Okay, so for me, it was funny because it was literally the one number I didn't want to be.
Is that common, do you think?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's very common. Because for 7s, I feel like they are described as being kind of the flighty fun time committee. And I've never felt like that, at least externally.
Yeah.
And so it took a while for me to dig into, so it was interesting because those outward descriptions of how you might look if you are that type, I was like, that's not me. And then I would dig into, every type, every main type has a core fear. They have a lost childhood message. And so there's deeper teachings once you start to look at the layers of what's going on in each type, and everything else fit. And so I felt like it was kind of a denial for a while of like, that's just not me. I'm not like the life of the party. I'm I feel like I'm more of an extrovert in my older age, but man, I was a quiet introvert for a long time.
Yeah. Yep.
I got the teacher reports was like, Andrea needs to speak up more in class. I was that person.
Really?
Oh yeah. Very quiet, very shy for a large portion of my life. So, so once I was able to say, okay, if all of these other things fit with the 7, let's start to separate core motivation from behavior. And that is the key difference between the Enneagram and other personality assessments. Other personality assessments are only looking at behavior because that's the only way you can concretely test. So there's a behavior or an aspect of your behavior that is being figured out with these personality assessments, where the Enneagram wants to dig deep into your core motivations. Why are you the way that you are? And how can we answer that? And your core type answers that. So for me, it was why do I keep, why can't I stick with things? Why do I feel like I have monkey brain where I'm just like, idea. Why am I nonstop thinking about how to like redecorate the house when there's no point in redecorating the house? But it's fun. So once I figured out that like the more uncomfortable I get in my life and the more I'm dealing with tough things and either being stuck in tough things or having to talk about tough things, the more those like impulses to do something really fun or to, make dessert or reorganize the house or look for clothes online, or like I saw those impulses. I'm like, oh, there's a real connection there. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So then I figured out, there's a whole subsection of your type that gets into our instinctual variance. So I'm actually the counter type. So this gets into a whole thing. Once you learn your type, this is why I always tell people, go back to the core motivation. Go back to the core motivation. If you can separate that motivation from behavior, you'll get less confused. So each type, each number also has a counter type where their internal motivation is the same. My internal motivation is the same as all sevens, but I repress the way that that shows up in the world. And for each of the numbers, there is a counter type.
Okay.
They have the same motivation, but the way it shows up in the world is repressed, or they try to keep that behavior under wraps. Yeah. That's part of why it took me so long. And then by the time I had figured out my type, it had been like almost a year of study. And I was like, well, I know a lot about the Enneagram now.
I should maybe do something with this.
I know. And here's the thing. Once you start looking at it too, I couldn't stop talking about it. I knew I was that person who like could not help myself. And I wanted to talk about it all the time. And so I found a group of people who I paid to listen to me. No, I was kidding. The class was really helpful, and getting certified was helpful. And yeah, it's like, man, if I can keep talking to people about the Enneagram, that's awesome. Let's do it.
Well, I feel like your sevenness makes you the way that you show up as a 7, I think makes you a perfect Enneagram coach. Like back in the day in our friend group, I feel like you are a very grounded, very nurturing, very caring person, but you also know how to bring in the fun. And you were always the one that was like the first to be able to help us laugh our way through something that was really tough.
Yeah.
But never by making fun. It was always validate the person's experience first, and then let's see what we can move ourselves into a different state of being. So I think that this is perfect for you. And I just am so excited for all the clients that are going to get to work with you on this stuff.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So why should I care about my Enneagram number? We've talked a little bit about it, but let's like completely answer that question.
We did. Yeah. So for me, I'm going to go back to my personal experience. For me, I am in my 40s now. Something significant, I think, happens in this part of our lives where we're like, I don't want to keep doing, I'm not the same person I was when I was 20.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. But here we are in our 40s, and we still have this whole second half of life. And so for me, I wanted to grow, and I wanted to have a deeper understanding again of why I keep doing some of the same things over and over. Why there are so many patterns in my life that have repeated themselves. And I think that the Enneagram can give us at least a start of what does it look like to be more self-aware and to have a practice in place to help us with self-awareness. And that's, I think, the daily rhythm part of the Enneagram that can be really, really helpful. Most people don't work on personal development as it pertains to just being a better version of you.
Right.
There's oftentimes either it's, there's various spiritual practices which are great and they can have that byproduct of becoming a better person. But some people who have spiritual practices are still kind of horrible to be around. Right? Okay. And then we can also have personal development in the sense of like, it's with an end goal. So to have a better business, to be a better teacher, to be a better whatever we are in the world.
Yeah.
So this is just self-improvement to be a healthier version of yourself for the basis of not only your own journey, but for those around you. And again, growing in compassion and understanding for the people that you love, for the people that you're in relationship with. I think that's a huge gift. And I think we've just forgotten how to see each other.
Yeah.
We've forgotten that that other people have a story to tell, and that when we come face to face with them, we're not always getting the full story of who they are. So yeah, I think that's why it matters. And discovering your type again will show you where you need to go on that map. It will give you a direction for growth once you actually figure out your core type. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any stories or examples of people that you've worked with or close to you or that you've even been mentored by about how the Enneagram has been helpful for them?
Yeah. So I have used my family. I'm going to talk about my family a little bit without giving names. I've used my family as guinea pigs because they were like this much interested, and they love me and want to be helpful. So that's been really great. Uh, so it's been great. I have had some meetings at least. I'm using them because I know that they love me and they'll be okay with me talking about them. So I have had a meeting with each of them. We've done a coaching session. Some of them had been looking at the Enneagram already, but just were not sure of their type.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really fun to be able to hear them discuss it and to be able to ask questions. And then the cool thing about coaching is that, like, it's not me telling you your type, but it's a process of you figuring out for yourself.
It's like
So
you're going mining for the jewels.
yeah,
It's just like kind of getting
yeah.
away from the junk.
And I know the questions to ask. I know each type enough to be able to ask the deeper questions. So it's been really cool, especially for someone in my family who is a 5.
Okay.
Who I think, the 5 is the investigator. They're like the knowledge gatherers. And they live very much in their head and in their thoughts. And this can make them sometimes be misunderstood by other people as not having emotional depth or not being very feeling people.
Yep. Yeah.
But that's because everything that they take in is first going through their head and they need time to figure it out. So they don't tend to express things. When they do express things, it's in a matter of facts. It's usually
yes.
very accurate facts and not feelings. And so I think that there was a level of first the validation of knowing, like, yes, you are that type. Here's what that means. But then having the rest of our family being able to know, hey, this is why this person sends you one-word text messages. They're not going to say good morning. How are you? I hope you had a good night. Here's what I need to say in my text message. And that's okay. Like, they're not without feelings. Everyone has feelings.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So there was a level of understanding and compassion that the rest of us were able to gain just by knowing this individual's number.
Yeah.
And being able to relate to him differently and say, okay, we're going to give him, when we need to all make a decision, when there's a family decision, it's important to give this person the facts ahead of time.
Right.
Give him all the information so that he can he can feel like he has time to think, time to process on his own and not be rushed. And then we are actually going to benefit because we are like, he's amazing when he can think through and figure out an answer.
Yeah.
Like 9 times out of 10, there's no reason to question him. Because he's wise, there's so much wisdom there.
Yeah.
But then after he's had that process time, he's able to be more authentic when he comes and shares with us. So then we actually get some of that emotional, like the feelings part that we might not have gotten if we had just forced him into a decision or forced a decision out of him when he wasn't ready and when he hadn't processed. So I think that was huge just from our personal experience of how it's worked in our family.
And that's amazing because I feel like as each person comes into the healthy expression of who they are, they actually bring something really crucial and vital into community. And, I think for me growing up, how we did, one of the messages I got at first was that it's wrong to work on yourself. You should really only focus on other people. But here we see an example of a really practical example of, as you work on and grow yourself, you actually do serve other people by being
Yes.
able to show up as a better version of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you aren't healthy, what are you?
Yeah.
Everything, all of your interactions are unhealthy. Everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Man, the time is flying here. So I want to ask you one last question before we finished up. We've talked about what is the Enneagram. We've talked about why should I care about my number. We've talked about some of the basic structures of the Enneagram, and also a little bit about some of the types. We're going to spend some time in future podcasts talking about the types much more in depth. So be looking for that.
Yeah.
But the last thing I want you to touch on, and I know this is actually a really big subject because of controversy, that, what is the wrong way and what is the right way to use the Enneagram. So maybe just like touch on a few things that you've seen and that you want to make sure that people know about better ways to use the Enneagram.
Yeah. So wrong ways to use the Enneagram. Again, you sell yourself short, you sell the Enneagram short if you only use it as like a parlor game.
Okay.
If it's just something where you know your number, and so, you understand this much of it because you think you have your type or your number figured out.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one thing, just to use it as, a point of conversation and to not actually use it for what it's intended, which is for growth and movement and for further understanding of the people around you.
Yeah.
It's also not an excuse for bad behavior.
Mm.
So you will, I've heard people say, well, I'm a 6, and so I just question everything because I'm super anxious. That's just how, or, fill in the blank with any type. Well, I'm a 7, so I just can't help but, be the party animal.
Right.
Like, I'm just going to avoid it. Like, I'm going to have, a second glass of wine because.
Right.
So whatever it is, each type has its way of becoming an excuse for bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
When really the point is to not depend on the mechanisms of your type.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to be more of an average to unhealthy 8.
Right.
You want to be a healthy 8, which actually starts to take on the attributes of type 2.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's this whole becoming, we're all changing and evolving. So don't use your type as an excuse.
Mm.
Also, don't type other people.
So hard. It is so hard.
That's fine. Just keep it inside. And whatever you do, don't tell that person what you think their type is if they haven't discovered it on their own.
Okay.
And that's really hard.
How
and
about
that
your
would
kids?
be
How about
what?
your kids? How about your kids?
Okay, so kids as a whole. Okay, so here's what they're saying about the Enneagram in kids.
Okay.
For the most part, you will start to see type as early as age 10.
Okay.
But it is really hard to pinpoint until a person moves into independence and adulthood.
Okay.
So therefore, typing kids.
So don't slap a label on your kid.
Don't slap a label. And for sure, don't tell them. They could start to learn about the 9 types,
mm-hmm.
about how each person sees differently and interprets their world. We've kind of started talking about that with our older boys a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, but I only answer questions that they ask.
Mm.
Now, little do they know that behind the scenes, I'm oh, I see this tendency. I don't know what's going on in your motivations, but I see this tendency.
Right.
So let me connect what I know about the Enneagram and see if that helps.
Yeah, that's good.
They even say to start with some basics the chart of the Enneagram, the circle, again, those triads: thinking, feeling, doing.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking is the head, feeling is the heart, doing is the gut or the instincts.
Mm-hmm.
And so even asking those 3 questions. So when your kid is, struggling with something, what do you think about that? how does that make you feel? And then what do you want to do about it?
Ooh, those are
And
good questions for anybody.
it's good questions for anyone, right? Um, and maybe if you are wanting to talk about the Enneagram, but someone doesn't know their type, you could start asking those 3 questions and see
Yeah,
which one they answer easier.
I love that.
Yeah.
Anything else that we need to know about using the Enneagram the right way?
Oh, yeah, because I've said a lot of wrongs, haven't I?
Yeah. You also
Um,
said a lot of rights. I know one thing that
yeah,
you mentioned to me before is you can't be more than one type.
correct. That is so correct. You can only be one type. And again, that's true for your entire life. And I think that is a point of confusion for a lot of people who are looking at the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you that as you learn, even if you have questions like, so for instance, as a child, especially until I was in college at some point, I was so quiet.
Mm.
It started to change probably in high school a little bit, but so quiet. Now, I have figured out that as I've studied the Enneagram, why that is. Why? Because for my type, for type 7, you usually have kind of 2 different versions of childhood. You've got some 7s who were like the crazy bouncing off the walls kid who just loved adventure and loved new things and just wanted to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Or you had the quiet, reserved in their head, which is actually, they talk about it, what is the term? So there's this whole other subsection of the Enneagram that talks about the soul child theory,
Oh, interesting.
that some types will actually, they're the soul child of their healthy numbers. So for me, I feel like my childhood was very much, I looked more like a 5,
Okay.
which was my growth number.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then like as I approached that independence, like there was still this, like all the 7 motivations from internal, but it presented less as a 5 up in the head and more as a 7 wanting to try new things and be out there and be adventurous and all that stuff.
Cool. Really
Did
cool.
I
So
answer your question?
yeah, you did. And it also shows that there's just like so much depth to explore here. And
Yeah.
all of this sort of brings up why working with an Enneagram coach could be a really helpful thing. I think really for anybody to work
Yeah.
with a coach and discover, because there's with the Enneagram, it seems like there's always going to be more to uncover. There's always going to be more
Yes.
room for growth. There's always
Yeah.
going to be more realizations that come, validations that come, compassion that comes. So how can people find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah. My website is yourliferetold.com.
Okay.
And that's because the stories that we have been telling ourselves up until this point can be retold in a healthier way. So we
Love
don't
it.
have to approach the world the same way that we have been. So it's about retelling those stories. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram with the same
Okay.
handle, Your Life Retold.
So I'll be putting Andrea's links in the show notes on the vlog as well as the podcast. So you can find her there. Again, that's yourliferetold.com. And if you're interested in Enneagram coaching, it is going to change your life, I promise you. Super excited for you guys to be able to connect with Andrea and her work. And I know that she would be able to answer any quick questions on any of the social media platforms you might find her on as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is just like a drop in the bucket of what we're going to be bringing to you all in the future on the Enneagram. There's like, we could honestly talk for like 4 hours just about one type.
Yes.
So this is just like a sprinkle on top of what's to come for future meals, so to speak, on the Enneagram. So be looking for those podcasts. And again, please like, comment, subscribe, and click those notifications. And we always appreciate those 5-star reviews on your podcast apps. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Andrea.
You're welcome.